In today's video, I'm going over every weapon in the finals so far and giving some tips for every single one of them. It's been a long time since I made a video like this, and the finals has changed quite a bit since then. So while some of these tips in here might seem familiar, a good number of them are going to be brand new. So let's start things off with this spear. Using the spear's alt fire is a nice way to peek around corners and is a great way to get value with a usually pretty mid attack. Another way to get value with it is to damage people through barricades by jumping while attacking. Now, it's really tempting to only right click with the Sledgehammer, but in terms of time to kill, it's often better to do a left click and a melee instead. However, this doesn't mean that right click is just straight up worse in every scenario, as tricking an opponent into walking into an alt fire attack can get you some really ridiculous kills more often than you might think. In the earlier version of this video, I talked about how the KS-23 can destroy walls and how you can fire 2 shots into a wall, reload, and then fire the 3rd shot to go in and get a cleaner push, while also having more ammo for the fight. But I also heard some people talking about this weapon having hip fire inaccuracy, which is partly true. It does have some bloom if you hip fire while jumping, but that's about all that I could find in testing, so just be aware of that. Also, since my last video, the SA-12 can't winch cancel anymore, so the new best strategy for the winch is to try to get the initial winch every single time. There's pretty much no scenario anymore where you should ever save it. Because of this nerf, I would also recommend trying out mesh shield and learning mesh juggling if winch just isn't doing it for you anymore. Contrary to some people's opinions, Minigun can actually be a very strong weapon on heavy in the right hands, but it's crucial that you learn bunny hop priming if you want to even consider using this weapon at a high level. So to perform this action, what you basically have to do is you want to do a slide, then a jump, and then start priming your minigun. And then after that, you can continuously do more and more jumps until you run out of velocity. So basically like this. And you can also do this by holding down left click as well. Deagles can be a great weapon, but they tend to perform slightly worse than other weapons if you only hit body shots. Because this weapon relies heavily on getting headshots for it to be competitive, make sure that you are actively trying to get those headshots and not just autopiloting and getting body shots like a lot of people do with heavy weapons. It also has surprisingly good hip fire. Flamethrower can be a pretty good weapon, but to get the most out of it, you pretty much need to use a mesh shield in high level rank. In lower level lobbies, you can afford to use other specs, but against good players, having proper mesh management is crucial. Here's what you need to do. So to get the most use out of your flamethrower, you're going to want to probably use the mesh shield, especially in those higher level lobbies. So what you want to do is apply the burn like this, let the burn tick down, and your teammates can go and heal you or whatever. This is especially helpful if you're going up to face a heavy like this. Burn them a little bit, let the burn tick a little bit more, apply more burn, let it tick a little bit more. Easy win. The M60 is a pretty straightforward weapon, and probably one of the first ones you'll use when you're new to the game. So for all those new players out there, make sure that you put a red dot sight on this weapon because these irons are horrible. Also, the gun does get better recoil the longer you fire it, so do with that information what you will. At the time of writing this video, the M60 is better than the Lewis gun in most cases, but there is one thing the Lewis does better, and that's engagements at range. The Lewis keeps more of its damage over longer ranges, so in some maps like Kyoto, if you feel like you're struggling with the M60, try swapping to the Lewis gun instead. Although the M60 might have slightly better time to kills, the Lewis is pretty close, and in some of those longer range maps, that might just be the better option. The MGL actually has some pretty decent arena damage capabilities, so if you have some extra time, you can destroy some walls or stairs at cash out sites before the enemies arrive. It's also important that you try not to give enemy players high ground, as it's basically the #1 thing that will mess you up when using this weapon. The Shack is a really great weapon, but it's important that you realize its limitations when you use it. Make sure that it is reloaded constantly, and if you're at longer ranges, aim for the body, as the bullet spread can make headshots almost impossible past a certain point. It's also probably one of the best weapons to pair with Winch Claw now. Along with having suspiciously good hip fire, the FAMAS has some of the best time to kill on heavies and mediums out of the rifles. So if there are a lot of these players in the game, it might be worth it to swap to this gun. Also, for some reason, this scope seems to have more visual sway than the others, so while it might be a bug, there's really no telling when it gets fixed, so if you're in the future I would probably check to see if the scope has sway or not. Unlike the FAMAS, the FCAR has some of the best time to kill versus lights, and still pretty decent time to kills versus the other classes. But if your lobbies are mostly light players, it might be the best choice to pick up the FCAR. Make sure that when you use this gun, you pull down slightly more around bullets 6 and 7, as this is usually the part of the recoil pattern that messes most people's aim up. At the current state of the game as of making this video, FAMAS and FCAR tend to have better time to kills than the AKM in almost every scenario. So while they are usually the better options technically, there is one use case where I would like the AKM more than the other rifles, and that is to burst down mesh and dome shields if you don't have a light with a glitch grenade. That's because the AKM has the most total damage per magazine, so if there's a lot of shields in your game, or if you just like having that extra ammo, the AKM might be the better option, but once again, in terms of time to kill, the other rifles tend to do a little bit better. CL40 has a lot of counters to it, but if you want to try and minimize them, I would recommend bringing Data Reshaper to deal with anyone using an APS, and I would also bring a jump pad or a zipline to get height, which is very important with this weapon. And above all, make sure that you don't let your enemy get too close to you and kill you with self-damage. If the dual blaze deflect feels really inconsistent, it's usually a server-side problem and not a user error issue. If you want to do well with this weapon, trying to keep your opponent guessing by mixing up whether you're going to attack or deflect at close range is a great way to get value from this weapon. And for some reason, a lot of people don't know that you can deflect other melee weapons with them. Dual blades against other melee weapons is still a pretty bad matchup, but this might win you a couple games, so go try it out. Since animation canceling has been removed, mixing in melees between every shot with the model isn't an option anymore, and at the time of recording this video, if you're fighting a light, it's best to try and hit them with 2 shots instead of 1 and a melee, as in this patch, the old combo leaves them with just a little bit of health. Also, it's faster to reload this thing when it's fully empty, so sometimes it's best to just use up all the ammo before reloading. A lot of people treat the Pike as a strictly long-ranged option, but if you simply get used to quickscoping with this weapon, it can dominate at pretty much any range. So basically just mostly avoid the hipfire and get used to aiming down sights at pretty much every range instead. Putting the red dot on the revolver does end up changing the zoom value on the weapon just a bit, so if you ever felt like something was off when using it, that's probably the culprit. Some of you big revolver players probably already know this, but going for headshots should be your top priority with this weapon. Otherwise, using pretty much any medium weapon will give you better results in TTK. A good amount of you are actually using the Riot Shield wrong. If you run sideways like this, it lets you block bullets while on the move. Also, the shield can block flashbang effects, so if you want to fully build into the annoying guy, there you go. The Cerberus can ignite gas and goo because the rounds are incendiary, bringing even more utility to an already really good weapon. The repeater can basically be a model, but with crazy range if you play it correctly. So make sure that you are always playing around corners, make use of movement, and quickscope if the enemy gets too close to you for maximum effectiveness. Also, you get this fast reload if you're completely out of ammo. A lot of people get way too focused on trying to use the 9.3R like the FAMAS when it's really not. One of the biggest advantages of this gun is actually its close range, and the hipfire on it is pretty good. A lot of people don't see the value in the ARN, and that's usually because they're trying to use it like M11 or other close range options, which is inherently the wrong approach. This thing keeps a lot of its damage over range, so making sure that you prioritize taking long range fights and off angles is especially important with this gun. So basically use it like a fully automatic LH1. The Dagger backstab tech is still in the game. All you got to do is be roughly this far from your opponent, dash 180, and then release your right click for a backstab. I recommend turning melee aim assist off to do this, as it sometimes ends up auto-aiming to the front of the player model, which you really do not want to happen. And for maximum dagger chaos, try using a combo of thermal vision, smoke, and gateways. But before you do this, make sure your team is on board, as this is a very specific playstyle. The headshot multiplier for the LH1 is quite good, so oftentimes it's worth it to actively prioritize headshots when using this weapon. Also, if you have a hard time aiming with it, I've found that using thermal vision is a great way to help you get practice in and get more used to the recoil, mainly because it highlights the targets through all of that recoil. So give it a shot if you're having trouble using this weapon. The ADS does literally nothing for you on the bow, so don't ever use it. Also, the projectile is a lot bigger than you might think, so don't be afraid to try and go for headshots because they technically are more likely to hit. One of the best ways to use M11 is to get close enough to take advantage of the hipfire and then get out as soon as possible. And while I used to recommend using cloak with this gun, especially in higher ranks, it's been nerfed to the point where I now think dash is probably the better option. If you want to quickscope with the sniper rifle for perfect accuracy, you do need to give it a second. Here's an example of me quickscoping wrong, and here's an example of me doing it right. It's also good to mention that this gun turns into a projectile weapon after a certain point. Throwing knives have the potential to be very good, but unless you're hitting headshots, it's probably better to use any other light weapon in terms of time to kill. Also, you can now hold down the alt fire, which does a ton of damage. And it's good to know that the alt fire does have a different throw trajectory than the normal attack. Since the cloak nerfs, I recommend even more to bring dash instead of cloak with the double barrel. The number one tip I would give to most new or intermediate double barrel players is to start making sure they hit their shots instead of trying to quickly get in and out without doing any damage. The more you'll use this gun, the better you'll get with being fast at it, so just give it some time, learn to take your time with the shots, and you'll just naturally get faster the more you play with it. Also, like the Dagger, thermal vision, smoke, and gateway can be really good with this weapon. Like the M11, the hipfire on the V9S is pretty decent, so take advantage of this when you can. If you are on MNK, make sure that you aren't tensing your hand up too much when using this weapon, as that's going to ruin your aim if you don't normally play at high tension, and many people end up unknowingly do this when they use rapid clicking weapons like the V9S. So just make sure that when you're aiming, you are nice and relaxed, and I guarantee you will hit more shots. The XP54 is one of the best light weapons in the game, but learning the recoil to beam with this gun is even more important than some of the other weapons. Ideally, you want to be at a sort of mid-range distance, and only close the gap when you can get a kill confirmed, so don't use it like the M11. M26 is basically a pre-nerf model for the light class, so the old melee combos should still work with this gun. When playing the Matter, make sure that you try to utilize corners as much as possible, and then go in for the dash kill if they run or are at low health. By looking up and doing a dash after a sword lunge, you can make some crazy distance. But you can also do something really similar with just a well-timed jump at the end, but the timing is pretty tight. And that was at minimum one tip for every weapon in the finals. No long outro today, leave a like and a sub if this was helpful, and I'll see you next time.